this is like Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. But so I thought it would be worthwhile to have a kind of summarizing experience of what we've been up to. And let me kick off with a few things, and then just kind of move around the table and see what you have to say. First, I've been very pleasantly surprised to discover that we have quite an interesting audience in addition to the people who are physically here. I've been getting emails from priests around the country all week who have been watching this. So I wasn't too impressed with the idea of live streaming and all the rest of it, and to find out that I got someone from Massachusetts, someone from Texas, someone from Canada. So I mean, that is one of the good things about this approach. And now we will also have, this is archived, and we're also going to make DVDs out of it. So it will be available well beyond this situation. Secondly, I've quickly looked over your remarks, your feedback, and first of all, thank you for your feedback and for your kind remarks. Last year, the one important point that was made across the board was that 2 days was not enough. It should be 3. Well, now I get a consensus that 3 is not enough, and we should make it 5, and have longer breaks. And I hesitate to do the 5 simply because of pastoral contingencies. Who's getting whom to replace whom and all the rest of it. And I didn't want to do it on a Monday because I figured, you're probably nailed down on Sunday and you're not going to be able to travel on Sunday. And so let's do it on Monday and start on Tuesday. And I shied away from Friday for the reason that get back in time for a weekend. So who knows? But we'll take a look at that. And but if we did expand it, certainly we could have more downtime. But if you can imagine, this was compressed last year into 2 days. So if you think you've been on a treadmill now, last year was far worse. But and also I've neglected to say to this point, but how appreciative I am for Matt's great work this whole time. And I said to someone earlier that he's a good MC liturgically, but he's also good at this kind of thing. And if you're a good MC, nobody knows you're there. And I always say, if someone says, "Oh, Father so-and-so is a wonderful MC," it means he's not, because you shouldn't know that he was there. And but Matthew is efficient and he's generous. And I said to Monsignor earlier, you ought to pray to get him as your curate next year after he's ordained. So. But thanks, Matt, really, and he does it all with a smile. I think the second time I met him, I told him that if this priesthood gig didn't work, he could be a used car salesman. One of the things I'd like to kick off with is something that's come up in private conversations more than in the general sessions, but I think it bears talking about precisely for the benefit of those who may be watching us a longe, and that is the relationship between the local parish school and the diocesan office of education, whatever that's called, wherever you are. As Archbishop Chaput noted in his welcome letter, Philadelphia was the first diocese in the country to have a diocesan superintendent of the schools. And I have certainly always been in favor of that, precisely because it guarantees a certain common competency throughout the Catholic school system, as it were. And as that person becomes an ombudsman, if you will, for Catholic education within the diocesan curia. And it also enables, let's say, principals to have some kind of person that one can go to if there's a local problem. That having been said, there are situations in certain dioceses, and again, we can't generalize, where there's sort of a long claw of diocesan administration that reaches down into a parochial setting and essentially tells the pastor, number one, and sometimes as well the principal, that they're not really in charge of the picture. And I think the first point to make is that diocesan staff are support staff. And in the best scenario, they're the first ones to tell you, we're not here to dictate policy to you. We're here to help you implement a proper vision of Catholic education. But issues of hiring and firing and tuition and salaries, those ultimately are the decision of the pastor. Canonically, he's the superintendent of any parish school. Any other official certainly has some kind of competence that may be given to the individual by the diocesan bishop, but that does not take away the canonical responsibility of the pastor. And I think that those lines of authority need to be very, very clear. And sometimes that can lead to a great deal of tension when local decisions are being made. And one of the priests has mentioned, he's in the process of revamping the curriculum in his school and hiring a new headmaster, and has gotten an awful lot of interference, problematic interference, from diocesan staff, and that's inappropriate. And now, certainly, they have a very important responsibility about ensuring Catholic identity, and that certain basic standards are met and so forth. But at times, there's people cross over the border into areas that really are not their responsibility. And so, again, I don't know where it applies for whom, and if anyone wants to address the issue, either from personal experience or what's been said or whatever, I'd be happy to. Father Chris, did you have any comments on that front? Okay, so why don't we start with takeaways? What are some of the takeaways that we have? And we'll kick off with Junior.
I think these last days have been kind of an eye-opener for me because, first of all, I haven't had too much experience in the parish. I was telling Monsignor earlier, my first experience in the school was teaching at St. Albert's under his supervision. So that was 6 years ago now. And since then, been formed myself, but I don't think I knew then, really what the role of the priest would be. I knew that Monsignor was involved, and over the years I've seen other priests involved to varying degrees in the school. But I think it really has been interesting to find out how much the priest can impact and should impact the community, not only the school community, but the parish results are also tangible, and even the wider community, as you mentioned earlier in some other talks. So it really is an invaluable presence, and I just hope to, before I even start my ministry, kind of be aware of that and spread that to people that I can. So, good things.
Talking about the pastoral outreach of the priest in regard to the school community, we tend at times to think of it in very narrow terms, like the priest ought to be providing sacramental outreach, penance services and mass, obviously, and things of that nature. But that always seems to be directed almost exclusively at the students. There's another whole population there that desperately needs pastoral care, and that's the faculty, who very often, particularly if the teachers are not members of your own parish, they may be quite comfortable in approaching you for a pastoral problem that they don't want to talk to their own parish priest about. And I think we have to make it known that we're available to do that kind of thing for them. And then also in terms of pastoral care of parents and grandparents. So it's not it's a very, very broad scope of pastoral outreach that we ought to be considering. And I think I may have mentioned it in the first session, but it bears repeating. The importance of having Catholic parenting workshops, because we're dealing with a generation of parents now who, for the most part, weren't parented properly themselves. And so they don't know what they ought to be doing even. And again, there may be some initial resistance to it, but generally, certainly my experience has been, once that hurdle is overcome, they're among the first ones to say, this was something very good and very helpful. I'm doing a workshop for parents in a couple of months on creating and maintaining a Catholic family. Just some common sense approaches to what can and should be done in the home. And the couple of times that I've done it, parents have said, I've kept those notes and I've passed those notes around to other people. Very often we find people aren't doing things that ought to be done, not because they're opposed to them, they just don't know that they can or should be done. And just to open people's horizons a bit is in itself very, very important. And if we believe, what we should, that parents are the primary educators of their children, we ought to be giving them the tools to be those primary educators. And so in terms of, what's the pastoral role of the priest in reference to the school, that's certainly a very important aspect of it. Bob?
A lot of what came up here this week may also resonated with my experience with Catholic schools. The teacher and parent formation I thought was very, very important. The parent formation particularly, I have memories of the confusion, immediately after the council and not having materials, having caught up with whatever it was, and the sisters really being confused and unable to answer certain questions. Having said, well, it used to be this, now they didn't know how to answer the question, which changed the subject. So I think there's a whole generation out there. There's parents now, maybe moving into grandparents that don't know, weren't catechized well, and so there's an opportunity there with parent formation.
And it's not just the facts of the faith. There's an attitudinal component that's often lacking.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that we can do in a school is provide proper foundational attitudes for kids who in turn can bring that home, but also through overt programs directed at parents. That's also important.
The interconnectedness of what happens in school and what happens at Mass on Sunday, and the importance of liturgy done well. And then lastly, the presence and visibility my pastor growing up was that way, and it made a lasting impact for me. And it's been many years since, but I think towards in between probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for having had him in my background.
Yeah. I think of that very, very powerful presence of priests in my boyhood who were omnipresent, and certainly the most important presence of them, certainly for a kid, was their presence in the school. And with all the travel that I do, you sit on an airplane and someone sits next to you and says, "You're a priest, you're Catholic." Well, I went to Catholic school, and you start getting the stories. But one of the stories that consistently comes back, I remember when Father Bob would come over at recess and play hoops with us and do this, and those are fond memories. And a couple of one of the things I do, and Father Chris knows this, is I give to out-of-towners, I give what I call my tour of Catholic New York, and sometimes kids come from different parts of the Catholic school, kids from different parts of the country, and it's amazing. You're going through New York with 25, 30 kids in uniform, and people stop you and say, Catholic school kids went to Catholic school, and sometimes this little tear even comes. I remember that so well, and one woman stopped us a couple of years ago in the middle of a huge thunderstorm. You don't want to stand and talk about memory from 40 years ago, and she said, I don't know why, but I kind of dropped out of going to Mass, and she said, but seeing these kids, it reminded me of how good it all was, and thanks for bringing them around, and maybe this is what God wanted me to see to get back on track. It's not an academic argument about either why she was missing Mass or why she ought to be going back, but there's a tug at the heartstrings, and for the most part, we've done a darn good job at reaching people at that level. Now you get the absurd stories about, I was beaten to death by a wild nun. But whenever I'm told that on an airplane, oh yeah, the nuns used to whack me around all over the place. And I said, well, I got to tell you, in 13 years, I had, over 35 different nuns. I was never hit, and I never saw anyone beaten. I mean, a whack on the side, but the neighbors in our apartment building did to us as well. And I said, but I just want to ask you this. Did you deserve it? Oh yeah, I was a hellraiser. I said, okay, well, the next time you tell the story about a nun rapping your knuckles, make sure you say, but I was pretty bad. I said, so at least that people who weren't there get the full picture. And, but there's a great novel which made its debut as a play here in Philadelphia. Do Patent Leather Shoes Reflect Up? Do any of you remember that? And I thought I knew the author, and I thought it was very, very clever on his part to have the debut of the film here at is it Walnut Street? Yeah, and it's just a wonderful. I mean, it's humorous, but it's humor that's done from the inside by a member of the family, and it's loving. It's not sarcastic or satirical, and but I thought it was a scream. There's a scene in the play of a May crowning, and as the kids on the stage start singing "Hail Mary, we crown thee with blossoms today," everybody in the theater stood up and sang it. And I said, only in Philadelphia. And then it went from here to Broadway. And it was sold out for 4 months in advance in New York, but got canned in the review of opening night by the New York Times, and it closed after the first night. The power of negative media. Something that was sold out for 4 months in advance. Amazing. But anyway.
I was sharing with Father Chris, the other Father Chris, that I'd bought a sign for my schools. I've been doing this since I've been a pastor, from St. Meinrad Arch Abbey. It says, knowing that Christ is the reason for the school.
Mm-hmm.
Is the center of all that we do. And try to make that, just make sure they put it up in the middle of the office where it's very visible. And hopefully as a reminder to the teachers, but we're always trying to find a better way and a more palpable way to bring Christ into the midst of the school. And I think, not only in the presence of the priest in the midst of the school, but I think the notion of, really making, reaching out to the families as well. I think we can all say that our kids, the home life affects the kids academically as well,
Sure.
Spiritually, everything else. And there are a lot of kids that are dealing with a lot at home. And so to help bridge that gap as well, is also not only a boon for the child in the school, but also to help the family find healing and growth as well. So I think that again, formation for the family as well, not only in the areas of faith, but just in the simple ways of family life.
Well, what John Paul talked about in Pastores Dabo Vobis, in terms of what's the first level of priestly formation, it's human formation. And those human skills are so lacking in society today. A couple of years ago, I was going into Macy's, and I noted behind me, I kept the door open for the woman behind me, and she came in behind me and she said, "Wait a minute, what did you just do?" I thought, "Oh Lord, what kind of a nut is this?" And I said, pardon me? She said, you held the door open for me? I said, well, yeah. She said, that hasn't happened in about 10 years. Right? And you observe this kind of thing, though. You know, you say, think about what people push through, shove, no greetings. I mean, the lack of civility. We're not even talking about Christianity. We're talking about being human. I mean, the pagan Romans knew how to behave better than most people today. And also, there's something else that, again, some of these intangibles. That first high school that I ran, as I told you, it was a zoo. And if that had been your only experience of Catholic education, you would have said, we ought to close them all up. And no discipline, no academic standards, no religious environment, nothing. And I was there, for maybe about a month, trying to work my way through this morass. And I got a call from a woman who said that she was a graduate student in some education program at a secular university, and she wanted to come and spend a day at my high school because she wanted to see what happens in a Catholic school. And I thought, oh, Lord have mercy, this is the last thing, And I said, oh, well, I knew, and there's just so much going on at the moment. I said, oh, I understand. Can I call you back? I said, yeah. So she called me back, unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, and I thought, well, I better do something, because otherwise she's going to conclude that it must be really horrific, and that word will get out even more than it is. And so I said, all right. So I gave her a schedule to follow for the day, and I put her on to a couple of really good teachers and some good sisters and so forth that I had. And I thought, I hope this is going to be decent. And she saw me about fourth period in a change of classes. And I said, how's it going? And she said, do you know what you have going here? And I thought, oh, no, I do. And I said, oh. And she said, this is incredible. And I said, I know. And she said, I said, well, what have you observed? And she said, Father, your kids, right, they smile, they greet people. I think they really like each other, and they like the teachers. And the teachers, I said, well, yeah. Now, I thought that was a sine qua non. And I said, and she said, I don't have that where I am. She said, the kids ignore each other. They curse each other. The teachers can't wait for the day to be over. And I said, okay. There was something there that was decent that, again, I took it for granted, but that's not the common experience. And again, as I do, student-teacher evaluations in public schools, I mean, the language even, the F-bomb everywhere. And they're tongue-tied if you tell them they can't use the word. And so just those human skills we need to foster. And for the most part, we do have that. And that's a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Since the time I was in high school, I really had a particular affinity towards Catholic schools and Catholic education, and that was strengthened, I think, in my time in the seminary. And one thing that had never been of particular concern to me that I realized and gained the importance of now as a priest through this time was the priest role in governance. And it was eye-opening to me, just knowing the stories that some of which you relayed, knowing stories from my own experience in Catholic schools, and the importance of the priest being involved, and the reality that there are some places where the priests aren't involved, but there are also some schools out there that are becoming basically Saint So-and-so's charter school. there's nothing really religious to it or about it. And the presence of the priest is what clearly brings that, and the involvement in more than simply the sacramental side of things, saying Mass once a week or hearing confessions. The importance of the priest is, more than just someone to come in and do the sacraments, but to be involved in the life of the school and really to see the schools as much of the parish as the church. I think you used the line yesterday that your school's not an appendage to your parish, it is your parish. And I found that to be kind of invigorating, but also almost strengthening a resolve to keep it involved, at least when I go back to my parish, in more than just going over to hear confession, say Mass, but to be strengthened in oversight and involvement to that degree.
I mentioned to one of the priests that in this era in which most of us find ourselves with the demise of sisters in the schools, the role of the priest, I think, is more important today than it was 50 years ago. Because through the sisters, there was a very clear, visible, institutional presence. And so, Father could come over when he felt like it, and it was sort of an enjoyable type of thing. But there was an ongoing, visible presence of the church there, which is not the case in most institutions today. And so I think we're called to take up the slack on that in a unique way at this moment. And, Father Jason was asking me at lunch, give me names of some religious communities that I can try to bring into the school. And it's great if you can do it. But the good communities that are still involved in schools have a waiting list till the parousia to go into various dioceses and take over institutions. So now, what's interesting though, you take, let's say, the Nashville Dominicans and the Ann Arbor Dominicans and some of these other good communities. By going into new places, they have gotten new vocations, and so they are multiplying themselves, and so they are going to be able to reach out. And I know one community that took on a school in a diocese where they had never been before, and their first 2 years there, they got 4 novices to their community just by being present in a new high school. And but at the same time, until we can get ourselves back to that, and I pray to God we will. And I think that's one of my most severe disappointments over the past 50 years, is that for me anyway, sisters were a powerful influence in my life and in the life of my parents. I mean, they brought my parents back to the church, and that feminine presence of the church was so important, and that's lacking today. And I've often said, at a theological level, I think if women religious had maintained their identity, there never would have been any interest in the Catholic community for the ordination of women issue. We've turned into a very male-looking institution precisely because there's an absence of a female face to the institution for a number of years. But their maternal outreach was so wonderful, and it was kind, it was loving, it was professional, it was demanding, but they were good mothers. That's what they were, and where that is present today, you see the glow in kids' eyes that deal with, like, these Nashville Dominicans everywhere they go. They're young, they're joyful, they're competent, and the results are palpable. But I think we need to pray for that. And one thing I was told as a young seminarian teaching, an older sister said to me, we sisters were very good at promoting vocations to the priesthood. Anytime we saw a boy that had the flicker of vocation, we would zoom in on him and try to prime him for this. You guys were never good at doing that for us. And I thought about that, and I said, I think she's right. And so I've been very, very,
Excuse me for a second. No, no.
I've been very conscious of that.
Okay.
That when I see a young girl or a woman that has what I think it takes to be a good religious, that I, as a matter of fact, do make a point of saying, have you considered becoming a sister? And when I do student body masses, and I will always ask, any boys here thought about becoming priests? And then last time I was in a school that had 4 sisters, actually. And I said, any girls thinking about becoming sisters? I said, Sister Eileen here is going to need someone to take over 8th grade in a few years. And girls respond to that. But I think we have to that's also be part of our vocation promotion, is for sponsoring, as it were, girls for good communities, stable communities where what was being done so well and so effectively can be picked up again.
Well, this has been a kind of an eye-opener for me, being a convert and a product of public schools, government schools. I've had limited experience with Catholic schools, and now I'm in a situation where both of the parishes that I work with have schools. And one, a traditional grade parish school, the other is classical curriculum academy that's just starting up. And so I'm just kind of processing all of this. This is what has, I think, particularly affected is, again, this idea of the presence of the priest in helping either maintain the Catholicity of the school or restore it in a case where it's weak. And I just had not thought about. It's just not something I give much thought to. And so,
Just to interject a moment, the restoring process is a lot harder than instituting. You can screw something up in 10 minutes. To rebuild is so difficult. And it has to be done very, very carefully. But it's got to be done.
well, and I have to say that what, insofar as I felt much about Catholics previously, I didn't think much of them because so many, what little experience I had was with schools like that where they lost it.
I would say another thing, sometimes you hear what I like to call uber Catholics, who will tell you how bad the schools are. And I say, well, what are you talking about? Well, when my brother went to so-and-so high school in 1982, and the sex ed program, I said, well, that's a lifetime ago. Have you been to that school recently? No. Well, do you think it might not be a good idea to check out what goes on there now? Those teachers are either all dead or retired. Programs have changed exponentially since then. And, God knows there were plenty of mistakes that were made. But, for the most part, I don't find that anymore. The most that I find, now granted, there's, I guess, some sort of self-selecting process. If you're going to ask for a program like ours to come in, you're probably sort of on the page to begin with. But even the stories I hear, the worst stories I hear, for the most part, that it's Catholic light, that it's not heresy, it's not outrageous things going on, that unfortunately were often true in many places. And so I think it's important to calm people down and bring them into touch with the present reality, not either a bad real memory of theirs or a bad rumor that they heard 30 years ago. And I did that recently with a couple, very, very fine couple, and their child is getting ready for first grade, and she said, in another day, Father, I would love to send him to the local Catholic school, but the stories I've heard, and I said, Well, if I were your confessor, I would say for your penance, go spend a day in that school. And she said, oh. And she went, and she said, Mother, it's beautiful. She's like, I went into, the first grade, and the kids were learning the prayer to the guardian angel, and I went somewhere else, and they were doing this. And she said, I want that for my son. I said, but you see, you're going on the basis of information from an eon ago. And I think that particularly those of us who have a reputation for being traditional type priests, we can throw a lifeline to people who have been badly abused in many instances, and they become their own priests as a result. I mean, and again, this is an instance where far left and far right meet very often. There's an anti-clericalism on both ends of the spectrum. One is natural. If you're, sort of a lefty, there's a natural anti-clericalism. But when you're on the right side of the spectrum, that's not natural for that theological position. And I think we have to be able to help those people come back and see what the reality is. And if there is a problem, then that needs to be addressed. And without getting into details, Father Chris discovered something a couple of weeks ago, and he brought it to the attention of the appropriate authorities. And so, I mean, obviously, where you have people, there'll be potential for problems, and there always were, but there's a mechanism to deal with it, or there should be, and I think we need to facilitate that. I'm sorry. Anything else?
Well, I'm also just going to reemphasize, because I think it's already been said a lot, but realizing how important is that presence of the priests in the school. I have the pretty unique privilege to be full-time chaplain in the school. That's my ministry. That's what I'm dedicated to. I don't have any administrative authority really in any way in the situation that I'm in. And so as we've discussed governance and a lot of things that can help build Catholic identity, I was thinking in my own mind what things I didn't have control over. But again, that priestly presence, going to lunch with the kids, going to the sporting events, all these things, realizing what an immense impact I can have on the students.
But also, whether or not you have administrative responsibilities, now that you know about issues of governance and so forth, that can be input into the system if those proper procedures aren't there. I mean, and that's, you have knowledge that they perhaps never had. And so, don't shy away. Doesn't mean that you're not in the line of authority in terms of the structure of the school, but you do have information, and information is power. And again, I think I go basic. I always try to operate by giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who's doing something wrong, that the person is doing it improperly because he or she doesn't know what should be done. Now, if you tell them the truth and they continue to do it, then it's bad will. But for the most part, it's probably just I was told that that's the way you do it. Okay, well, it's not correct, and think about making some changes in those regards. And also, have confidence. I think one of the worst aspects of priestly formation in the past 40 to 50 years is we don't train priests to be leaders anymore. We have to have this sort of, the nice word for it is collaborative approach. But, a committee can't do things, and there needs to be leadership. And, one of my favorite lines from the Old Testament, if the trumpeter gives the sound, a weak sound, no one follows, right? And as priests, we're shepherds. We're not sheep, And I think in most instances, seminary systems try to keep seminarians and priests sheep rather than shepherds. And, it's a good way to maintain order and control in an institution, but we're not giving leadership skills. And so, the fellow gets ordained, and, he's a parochial vicar for a couple of years. And so he keeps his mouth shut there because, well, I want to get out from under this issue and moves on, becomes administrator of a parish and then a pastor. And all along the line, no one has given him any kind of training in what it means to be a leader. And so he's being, and nature abhors a vacuum. And so what happens is someone else very graciously decides to lead him. And very often it just turns into a disaster. And so I think that's something else that certainly if I were involved in running a seminary, my idea is this. If you have a seminary, I'm not so sure that the whole system is all that great to begin with. My idea is a theological school where seminarians live in parishes and commute into school. But that's a story for another time. And but if you have a seminary, it seems to me the model ought to be West Point, not in terms of discipline, because frankly they don't have that much discipline there anymore anyway. But it's what's the goal of West Point? It's to train every cadet to be a general. Now, very, very few of the graduates of West Point will ever become generals, but the training is to be a general. And so mutatis mutandis, I would say, the training in a seminary ought to be to make every man a potential bishop. And we don't do that. As a matter of fact, we tend to punish guys whose head is a little bit above the rest of the crowd, because that's showing some kind of initiative, and he's not a team player and all the rest of it. But I think leadership skills are really, really important. We probably wouldn't be in all the confusion that we're in if priests had been properly trained in that regard. Monsignor?
Yeah, talking about the power of the priest presence brought back memories. I taught high school just 2 years. I was ordained 3 years, and they asked me to, if I would consider it. I really didn't want to. I was happy in the parish. But then they talked me into, and my first year I really didn't enjoy it that much. I was getting used to
Was it co-ed or all boys?
Co-ed.
Yeah.
But my second year I loved it. And I think the difference was I could really begin to see the influence you could have. You had these same kids in front of you every day, and the relationship that develops and things like that. So it really just brought back memories of. Then I got changed after a year, but the presence of a priest in a school setting can really be a very powerful presence. And I also take away I had a lot of hope by hearing about the independence mission schools we have here, independent mission schools. I really thought all our inner city schools would just disappear, but it seems to be working. Some new models are developing that are allowing Catholic education to exist.
Well, when I initially heard about the mission schools, I must say I was very, very nervous about it. And but the more I've discovered, it seems there are sufficient safeguards built in that they're not going to go off on their own or go off the rails. And because where that happens, then there's no point in the whole thing. And and I've had some good conversations with Anne, and she's extremely concerned about Catholic identity. And I should tell you an interesting story. When Cardinal O'Connor was the Archbishop of New York, he was a great supporter of Catholic education, and that largely came from his Philly background. And but he had regional meetings of Catholic school parents when he first got to the Archdiocese. And they were just sort of, share and care sessions more than anything else. And in the Bronx, he had a meeting, and he gave one of his fervorinos, and then he opened it up for any parent. It was parents and pastors, and there were probably a couple thousand parents and 30, 40 pastors from the Bronx. And a woman got up and she said, "Well, Your Excellency, I don't understand why my son has to go to CCD in order to get confirmed." And he said, "Well, you need, to get some kind of religious education for your kid to get confirmation, but why are you here? This is a meeting for Catholic school parents." And she said, "Well, my son is in Catholic school." And I guess he must have thought she's some kind of a nut, you know. And he said, well, what's the problem? What's the CCD story about? And she said, well, because our pastor says that because 80% of the kids in the school are not Catholic, we can't do sacramental preparation in the school. And so the kids in the school have to go to CCD to make first confession, first penance, and confirmation. And as only O'Connor could do it, he said, is this lady's pastor here? Very sheepishly, he said, is she all there, or is there a problem in the school? and the pastor said, well, you know, Your Excellency, and he wasn't a cardinal yet. And he said, and you're telling me that that's changing right away, huh? Lady, he doesn't have to go to CCD anymore. But I mean, that was the kind of crazy thing, you know, that because I have no problem with having a school that's 70, 80% not Catholic, but it's a Catholic school, you know. I evaluated last year a school in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. It is the highest percentage of non-Catholics in that school of all of the 51 high schools in the Archdiocese. It's 82% not Catholic. But they have daily Mass, they have Eucharistic adoration 3 days a week, they have confessions scheduled once a week, but available throughout. They have a priest full-time. And but the most amazing thing, 4 of their recent graduates are in the seminary from a school that's only 18% Catholic. And they're averaging 20, 30 kids a year becoming Catholic. In fact, one of my recommendations was that they have an RCIA program in the school, which, according to current diocesan policy, a school is not allowed to do it. They're supposed to go to a parish. And I said, well, that makes no sense. These kids are not Catholic. They have no connection to a parish. You're going to throw them into an RCIA program with total strangers. And if you did it through the school, it's familiar territory. And furthermore, you probably have 20 more kids doing it. And so the superintendent of the school said, good, let's move in that direction. So they're going to have, and most of the schools are going to have an RCIA program. But it's you know, the Catholic identity issue there, even in a place that's so heavily non-Catholic. And I interviewed kids for the 3 days I was there, you know, these Black Baptist kids. And I said, what do you like most about Sarah? Coincidentally, it was just a couple of weeks before the canonization of Sarah. And this one girl said, I love going to the chapel and just talking to Jesus when he's out there on the altar. And I thought, these non-Catholics during their free period are going to Eucharistic adoration. So when we do it right, and again, this is not imposing even. I mean, the kids are just told, you know, Eucharistic adoration from 9 until 2 on Thursdays and Fridays. If it's a free period, you just get a pass and you go down to the chapel. And I walked into the chapel several times, and you know, there are 15, 20 kids praying in the chapel. So we're not talking about proselytism, it's just making something available. But that's one of the things that I've been impressed with, what I think is going on, at least at the moment, and what seems to be a priority for the people running those schools. Last but not least.
Yeah, I found this very helpful. And when this information first came out, I did not have a school, so I didn't think twice about it. And then when I was assigned to a parish with a school, this was in the back of my mind. And I thought, and I went through the diocesan emails to find it, and I found it. And so that's what brought me here. And there's a lot I'm taking away, but I think one of the main things I'm taking away is something that Ann said in the session we had with her. That of the 15 Independence mission schools, a third of the pastors are involved, a third are moderately involved, and a third are not involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking, to what level do I want to be involved in my school? And of course, sitting here, I can say I want to be extremely involved. I want to be very involved. I want to be a presence. And I hope that plays out in reality, because I'm going to be overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, not just the school. So I hope I can be that presence in the school. But then I took it to the next level. saying, I also have a religious education program. And I'm actually texting them now to try and find out how many kids are in it. Because if I'm going to be present in the school, I got to be present in the religious education program too. I don't think I can favor one over the other. I don't think I would be a good role model, good pastor, good leader if I favored one over the other. So now I'm leaving here trying to strike a balance. How am I going to be that pastoral presence in both places? So that's one of the things that I'm leaving here with.
Well, I would say, from my own pastoral experience, every time I took over a parish, now granted they were small places because I was doing other stuff, but I did two things each time in the first week I was anywhere. I fired all paid personnel and I closed down CCD. And and I said to the CCD parents, I expect all your children to be in Catholic school. I didn't have a school in any of the 3 parishes. Here's a list of schools in the area. If you can't afford it, I want you to come to me with your IRS form from last year, and we'll work out some kind of a parochial responsibility for this. If you have decided that you do not want your kid in Catholic school, then here are the textbooks. You're the primary educators of your children. And when it's time for a sacrament, bring your child to me and I'll test the child to make sure whether it's appropriate to administer a sacrament or not. And it was amazing. First of all, I don't think I had 10% of the parents that even asked for financial assistance. And no, I had one mother who was absolutely committed to homeschooling. And I said, well, fine, then, do it yourself and you can do that. And we think about this, Cardinal O'Malley, he was raised in Pittsburgh, and in his inimitable style, he said, I think I was 2 years ordained before I ever heard CCD. I didn't know what it meant. And that's a very recent phenomenon in the church. And Andrew Greeley has some stunning statistics, which I would like to see updated. But among them are, the longer a kid spends in CCD, the more negative his relationship with the church. And it makes sense at a lot of levels, because first of all, it's something that's very extraneous, right? It imposes on their free time. And there's a massive disconnect between what you're trying to do in a CCD program versus the 30 hours of active secularism that they've been getting all week long. And I would also, something that always struck me, when I taught at St. John's University, as I mentioned, most of my work was in graduate ed teaching, but I also taught one theology course every semester. And invariably, by the students' initiative, the abortion issue would come up. And in my 10 plus years of teaching at St. John's, 2 fascinating facts as far as I'm concerned. 1, I never had a girl who was the graduate of a Catholic high school who spoke publicly in favor of abortion. Whatever her private opinion was, or God forbid what she may have done, I had no way of knowing. But certainly no public support for abortion. Conversely, never had a girl who was a graduate of a public high school who was anything but a vitriolic, vocal proponent of abortion, even screaming at me in a lecture hall about, take your rosaries off my ovaries and my body and all the rest. Not her fault. And this was consistent, by the way. It wasn't one weird girl. But this is what they get. And then, CCD teachers will be the first to tell you, if you have an hour class, you're spending the first 20 minutes trying to calm them down. And then maybe you have 15 or 20 minutes to teach something, and then they're looking at the clock and wondering when the heck they're getting out. And so, even in the most ideal circumstances, it's not something that works a great deal. And so I don't think we ought to be giving equal time to these things because the circumstances aren't equal. And very often you're also dealing with, one of the reasons that the kids are there in CCD rather than the school is the parents really couldn't care less. And and what they really come for is the social sacrament, and then you never see them again anyway. And so, is there a sacrament that's connected with a party? And if so, well, we'll bring the kid. And I had a guy at confession one time. I have no idea why he was there, but he was stammering all over the place at the beginning of the confession. And I said, well, how long can I help you? I said, how long since your last confession? Oh, a long time. And I said, well, a year, 2 years. Oh, more than that. I said, well, was there a particular occasion? Yeah, he said, what's that time when the old man, the old priest with the big hat comes? Right? Confirmation. There's a guy who's about 30 years old. Last time he was in a church was his confirmation. I think there was, a wedding that he was going to or something, and someone told him that he should go to confession. And he had no concept of anything. So I think we spend an awful lot of energy and an awful lot of money on something that over the 30-year period, the statistics are really pretty damaging. And at times I hear, DREs, for example, saying, well, if you gave us more money, well, money has nothing to do with the issue, right? It's the circumstances are such that it doesn't work. And, it's like, communities of religious that have taken, 2 or 3 wrong turns, and you say, your problem isn't money. Your problem is you got to admit the mistakes were made and try to retrace your steps. And in this instance, I think the church made an incredibly wrong turn by putting all kinds of energy into something that never had the potential to begin with. And you can say, all right, well, you made the effort, but let's look at the results. And the results are pitiful. They really, really are. So, that would be my take on it. I know I don't have a lot of support for that position for 1,000 different reasons. And most 90% of the reasons are political. They're not objective reasons, but it's, we can't alienate this group and we can't alienate that group. And I always say, well, Jesus didn't seem to be bothered by alienating people. He didn't get on the cross by being the Pillsbury Doughboy. And I think that's one of the things that priests as a group love to avoid conflict. We're pleasers by nature. And not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, you don't look to alienate people, but at a certain point, certain decisions are hard decisions, and you're not going to please everybody as a result of it. And so that's my approach. And all I can say is, at a parochial level, it's worked. And it's simply, it's not saying we're not attentive to the religious education of these kids, but it's saying we're putting it where it belongs. It's on parents. And even, to run a workshop once a year for parents on how to teach your children religion. That's all. Fine. You want to do that? Fine. But we're not going to expend all kinds of energy on doing something that we already have the data for. I said to one bishop that I'm very much in favor of, returning confirmation to before First Holy Communion, the proper order of the sacraments. And he said, oh, but then he said, we would never see them after 2nd grade. I said, so what are we seeing them for anyway? So they come in 2nd grade. You don't see them until maybe 5th or 6th again, because I don't know, depends on the policy in your diocese. Do they have to be there for 2 years or something or whatever? And so, yeah, they come for that. And the day of their confirmation, you never see them again. A pastor told me in Miami that he has 4 first communions during the month of May, 2 for the school and 2 for CCD. And he has an interesting little thing he does. He tells the kids and the parents that the Sunday after their first communion if they come to church still dressed in their first communion outfit, they will be the first ones to come up to receive Holy Communion, and then afterwards he acknowledges them to the congregation after coming at the announcements. And he said the 2 Saturdays of school communions, he averaged maybe 100 to 200 kids at the weekend masses who were coming back for the event. He said the 2 weekends of CCD communions, he had 3 kids. And he said, and I know, I won't see them again till confirmation. And yes, and someone will say, well, there should be some outreach to get them back. Well, no, they're not interested, right? Not the kids' fault, nothing to do with the kids, but the parents don't have the interest. And again, these social sacraments are, they're all a disaster. I mean, you have people in church for a first communion that haven't been there since the funeral of grandma, and please stand, please sit, please shut up, please don't do this, and what are we doing? But that's way beyond the whole problem of Catholic schools. That's stuff that we've allowed to go on for decades, and when you hear priests say, "Well, I guess we're just glad that they're there." Well, why? What are we doing? And is there any attempt to evangelize while they're there instead of a photo op? I had someone tell me one time we had the policy you can't take pictures at First Communion. We have a videographer. There's one person that does it, and so forth. And some guy, I'm placing the host on the little girl's tongue, and she consumes it, and then the father or uncle, whoever it was, hey, Padre, sorry, the flash didn't go off. You wanted to give her another one? What is this, McDonald's? So, well, anything else any other insights or missions?
Just one thing maybe I missed it when you talked about it, but one of the things I find a little difficult sometimes is the principal-pastor
Oh, yeah.
relationship. I take seriously my role as the head.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have decision-making
Yeah.
power, and sometimes the principal, we've gotten along fine. Yeah, I've had 4 different principals in 2 different parishes, but sometimes it's a little tense. About,
Good. I'm glad you mentioned it. Because you'll notice on the background information sheet that I gave you, I asked some pointed questions about the pastor and the principal. And one of the questions I asked is, on the school website, are you listed first or at all? Okay. And the first name on the school website ought to be Father Jim Smith, pastor. And then next is the principal, because you are the head of the school. All right. If it's a parish school, you're the head of that school. And then I asked, how often you meet with the principal. Now, one priest told me he meets every single day with the principal. And then, of course, it's also a golden opportunity. If you're there meeting with her, presumably it's a she, then you're also there and you can pop into a couple of classrooms at the same time. And by the way, Father, what I would suggest is build the school visit into your schedule. So if you have an 8 o'clock mass, just walk right over to school and say, that's my second station of the cross, is visit the school. And make known your availability, your desire to be there. But meeting with the principal on a regular basis, and of course there are going to be situations where you have one point of view and she has another, and there has to be some kind of meeting of minds. But ultimately, it is your decision, and but also the hiring policy. You got to hire the right person, and so you've got to say, what are the telling questions that I would be asking in the interview to make sure, as much as we can, that this person and I are going to be simpatico. A pastor told me recently that he has a good community of sisters teaching there, but he had made a decision about something, he and the principal together, had made a decision about some policy in the school, and then a group of parents went behind his back to the principal and got her on board with their position, which was counter to that of the pastor and what the pastor and the principal had agreed on. And he confronted her and he said, "Sister, this is, first of all, I can't believe how unprofessional you have been in this. You've undermined me, and at the same time, you've really undermined yourself, because those same people now can come to me in the future and say, well, you know, Sister Ermengarde of the Three Veils, we don't like what she said, so we're now going to talk to you." And you know, he said, and she started to cry about it and all the rest. But he called the Mother House, and he said at the end of the school year, he wanted her out, and she's gone. Now, I think that's an extreme example of non-communication. But I think, again, if it's clear at the beginning that, you know, the day-to-day running of the school is yours, but when it comes to setting policy, I want to be involved in that, and I have the ultimate say in what happens to this. I worked for a pastor once who was hyper involved. I mean, to something as ridiculous as the bus schedules for the kids' pickup and the menu for the weekly menu for the cafeteria. I said to him, "Jack, even the principal is not involved in that kind of stuff." "Well, I want to make sure, you know, a micromanager to the nth degree." And he went through principles the way you go through socks. You know, I mean, who wants to work for that kind of nuttiness? But you know, in medio stat virtus, and I think for the most part, if the pastor knows his role and the principal knows hers, and you have people of goodwill who want the best for the children, conflicts ought to be very minimal. And but at the same time, one of the ways you minimize the conflict is by having a clear policy. And I've also always had the policy, deal with matters when they're small, and you never end up having a big conflict. Just in terms of school discipline, I've always been a bear on dress code enforcement, because I think it sets the tone for everything. And in one school, we had 800 kids, and the very first day I stood in the front hall and gave out 250 detention slips for dress code violations. We had to use the cafeteria for detention. And wrong color tie, skirt hiked up, whistling Dixie, you know, and the next day I stood out there and I gave 50 detentions, and the next day it was 3 or 4. Months later, we were having our first, and thank God, only formal dance. And 2 little freshman boys were ahead of me in the corridor at change of periods. And I always say teenagers are like senior citizens. They talk loud thinking nobody can hear them. And these 2 little guys, I heard the one say to the other, "Are you going to the dance on Friday?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, the other one said, "Are you bringing a flask?" And the other kid said, "Huh? Flask? What?" "Stupid," he said. "You get a flask and you fill it with vodka or bourbon or something. You put it in your jacket, and then during the evening you take a swig from time to time." And the other little guy said to him, "Are you crazy?" And he said, "What?" One of my nicknames was Father Sherlock. And he said, "If Father Sherlock gives you detention for having the wrong color tie, could you imagine what would happen with booze?" And I reached out, put my hand on each guy's shoulder, and they turned around and I said, "You know he's right." And in all of my years of school administration, I only expelled 5 kids, and it was all 5 at once, and it was for drugs. 5 girls running a drug ring out of the first floor girls' lavatory. But that was it. And but I think very often we say, "Oh, let it slide." And, you know, and our Lord says, "Faithful in small matters, faithful in greater affairs." Deal with something so simple. And the first time that there would be a potential conflict with the principal. I'd say, let's deal with this now, and let's make sure we're on the same page, because I want to support you completely, and don't give me reason not to. And then there doesn't have to be a conflict ever. Okay, anything else? Well, once again, we're on schedule. I can't believe it. Well, thank you very much for being a part of this, and spread the word. And if there's ever anything I can do for your schools, your faculties, whatever, I gave you my business cards, and we're very, very happy to help in any way. I would encourage you, most definitely, to explore the possibility of doing that Catholic identity study. I think that'll give you a good pulse for what's going on, and also give a kind of a springboard for further action. So now, those going to the shrine, we're going to meet at, let's say, 3:20 in the front hall. Okay, and if you're coming back, you don't have to worry about your room. But if you're not, take all your goodies with you. Okay. So,
And room keys, should they be left at the center